Welcome back, focused learners. We're jumping right in today with an explainer that impartially explores some truly fascinating historical and spiritual philosophies. We're talking about concepts that honestly often go completely ignored in everyday conversation or traditional academic settings. We're going to dive deep into some amazing source material that examines the hidden dimensions of reality. And don't worry, we're going to break it all down step by step without taking any specific theological stance. Our goal here, simply to understand the text and the profoundly interesting ideas it presents about the universe and ultimately our place in it.
Let me just ask you this straight up. Have you ever felt like your biggest questions just go unanswered? You know that feeling, right? Maybe you're lying awake at night, staring at the ceiling, just wondering about the fundamental nature of life. Or maybe you've read ancient scriptures or philosophical texts and you just kind of sense that spiritual reality is far deeper, way more complex, and frankly, a lot more fascinating than the typical surface-level explanations we usually get. Well, you absolutely aren't alone. Throughout history, some of the greatest minds have wondered if there's just more beneath the surface of what we can physically see and touch.
Okay, let's dive into this. Because the source material we are unpacking today suggests that there are remarkable truths about the spirit world scattered all across ancient Eastern philosophies, forgotten historical texts, and they even intersect with modern psychological studies. These are concepts that a lot of people literally never get the chance to explore in a structured way. So we're going to systematically unpack these traditions to see exactly how they describe the unseen world and how those descriptions have actually shaped human history. So, moving right into Section 1, Beyond the Visible World. Before we get into how we interact with the spiritual, we need to introduce the first layer of our journey by looking at the macro architecture of the unseen realm.
It's so easy for most of us to spend our entire lives treating the physical world as the ultimate final reality. But ancient spiritual teachings present a totally different perspective. They suggest that the physical world, which, ages, where nations rise and fall, where wealth comes and goes, is actually temporary. On the flip side, the spiritual realm is foundational and endures permanently. Think of it like a massive oak tree. The visible branches age, they might snap in a storm, and their leaves constantly change and fall, but that hidden, unseen root system, that's the actual foundation that endures. The visible physical world is often just the result, while the unseen spiritual world is the actual cause. Grasping this completely shifts how you view life. Not everything important is visible.
And honestly, that perfectly illustrates our next point, which connects directly to how we experience reality. Just as science confirms that our physical senses are incredibly limited, our eyes only see a tiny spectrum of light, our ears only catch certain sound frequencies, these spiritual traditions suggest we are constantly surrounded by realities outside our standard perception. It's exactly like a dog whistle that exists outside our hearing range, or Wi-Fi signal silently filling the room you're in right now. Unseen dimensions aren't necessarily far away in some distant galaxy. They coexist right alongside ordinary life. The fundamental issue here isn't distance, it's awareness. Which brings us to Section 2, Hidden Spiritual Laws. Let's transition into how this unseen architecture actually operates and dispel a pretty common myth along the way. A lot of people think the spirit realm is just random and unpredictable, but there's a fundamental concept here. Spiritual causes produce specific spiritual effects. Just like the law of gravity operates whether you're paying attention to it or not, spiritual laws are said to operate regardless of human awareness. For example, the texts argue that faith naturally produces certain life outcomes, while fear actively produces destructive realities. Generosity, it doesn't just make you feel warm and fuzzy, it fundamentally affects reality positively. And truth directly shapes your perception. The compelling case here is that specific internal causes always yield specific, measurable effects in a person's life. I absolutely love this quote from the text. The spirit world is not chaos, it is order. When you really think about it, that's incredibly comforting. Highlighting and understanding this underlying order is what actually produces greater spiritual awareness for us. It basically means life isn't just random magic or dumb luck. It is a structured system of principles, actions, and consequences that anyone can learn to navigate. Let's move on to Section 3, the battlefield of thought. We are peeling back the second layer of our onion now, the actual mechanics of how we interface with this unseen reality. Now, what's really interesting about this slide is this beautiful cascading progression. We tend to pay super close attention to our actions, but remarkably few of us pay attention to our passing thoughts. However, spiritual traditions teach that thoughts are the origin point of literally everything. Thoughts become actions, actions become habits, habits forge your character, and your character ultimately shapes your destiny. It is a direct chain reaction. If you want to change your destiny, you can't just try to hack your habits. You have to rewind all the way back to the origin point.
Your thoughts. This is exactly why guarding the mind has historically been considered one of the absolute most vital spiritual disciplines. And because of that progression, we hit this sobering truth. Spiritual battles begin long before they appear externally. Just think about it. The last time you snapped at someone, that conflict didn't actually start right there in the room. It was probably brewing in your head for hours, maybe even days. The spiritual traditions argue that thoughts aren't merely private, isolated mental events. They are the actual initial battlefield of reality. The conflict exists in the mind way before you ever see a visible consequence in the physical world.
All right, on to Section 4, Words, Agreement, and Authority. We're shifting from the internal mechanics of thought to the external actions we take that influence our spiritual destination.
First off, we have to clarify a vital difference. Spiritual authority is the legal right to act. It's the permission to exercise power. The text points out the crucial difference between mere power and true authority. Think of a police officer directing traffic. That officer obviously doesn't have the physical power to stop a speeding semi-truck, but they have the authority to do so, and so the truck stops. Throughout spiritual history, individuals who understood their authority demonstrated extraordinary confidence. Understanding your spiritual position essentially strips fear and confusion of their influence over you.
So how do we actually use that authority? Well, through agreement. The spirit world is said to respond to what we consistently agree with. If you continuously entertain and agree with fear, hopelessness inevitably gains influence and destructive realities are empowered in your life. But if you agree with truth, truth actively begins shaping your perception and your environment. Our inner conversations and deeply held convictions are actively, continuously shaping our human experience. We aren't just passive observers in all this.
And the primary way we establish this agreement is through our speech. Words carry immense spiritual weight. They literally influence minds, shape emotions, create expectations, direct attention, and establish agreements. Think about how fast a single harsh sentence can completely ruin someone's day, or how a word of encouragement can turn their whole week around. People often speak carelessly and end up reinforcing their own limitations. But historically, great visionaries understood that the words you consistently speak often become the reality you experience. Words aren't literal magic, but they heavily influence your direction, and your direction ultimately determines your destination.
Now we peel back the final layer and arrive at Section 5, the journey within. This is the micro level, the ultimate revelation of how this realm operates.
A lot of folks imagine the spiritual realm as this incredibly distant place reserved only for monks on mountaintops. But human beings across all generations report these subtle, constant interactions in everyday life. We're talking about a sudden moment of guidance, a deep sense of conviction, a flash of inspiration while you're just standing in the shower, or a really impactful dream. The spiritual realm isn't distant, it's actively involved in daily life. It just might not always be cinematic or dramatic. Often, it's just a quiet impression of clarity exactly when you need it most. So the crucial point is captured perfectly in this quote from our source material. The greatest mystery is not out there, it is within. People will literally travel across the globe, hike up massive mountains, and visit ancient ruins to find spiritual enlightenment, always seeking some extraordinary external event. But the text revealed that the real frontier, the place where the most profound spiritual work actually occurs, is entirely internal. It's right inside our own hearts and minds. True spiritual growth goes way beyond just attending ceremonies or repeating routines. The hidden kingdom is built on the renewal of the mind and the development of character. And character development isn't just a self-help concept here. According to these texts, it's actual spiritual architecture. These aren't external achievements you can just slap on a resume. They are vital internal realities. The greatest transformations, the most significant battles, and the most amazing discoveries all occur within. If you're only ever looking outward, you're missing the actual journey completely. Which leaves us with this final, provocative thought to conclude our explainer today. Are you willing to look beyond the obvious? The source material suggests that the greatest secrets of the spirit world remain hidden, not because they're heavily guarded or inaccessible, but simply because very few people actually choose to look inward. If you truly want a deeper understanding of reality, the journey has to begin within you. Thank you so much for joining me for this deep dive. I hope breaking down these ancient concepts helped clarify what is just a beautifully complex and fascinating topic. Keep learning, keep questioning, and I'll see you in the next explainer.